Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to receive your presence today evening, which celebrates literature, art in all its glory. On behalf of SGRKF Foundation, I am Priyanka Sharma, your moderator for the evening. We all come from different walks of life, but I feel we all believe if there had to be two things that teaches us most to the point of transformation, actually, it has to be meeting people and traveling to places. All of this comes to a halt as we befriend work and our packed schedules with it. So, SGR Knowledge Foundation, with its motive to promote literature and words of wisdom in the mainstream, gave birth to the concept of Knowledge Series. It's a platform where eminent speakers come share their experience with and for society. What seems to be a very little concept later on metamorphed into a literature festival, which started back then in December 2019 as Orange City Literature Fest. The following second edition was conducted online in November 2020. The world was still in the realms of pandemic, but where has literature and art ever stopped to be life-gifting experience? We received a huge response. I must say, incredible to be very honest, because that year we realized that SGR Knowledge Foundation has a very different power when it comes to literature and art. We could reach out to almost every enthusiast. So, after that good response, we moved on to another series. Like we are continuing this for a long time now in association with GH Raisoni University, powered by Raisoni Group of Institution, which is going to organize its third edition of Orange City Literature Fest from 26th to 28th of November this year. Now, like I said, today's session on Samrat of Gupta Empire by Miss Nandini Sen Gupta is a part of our Literature Fest and is the 55th session of the Knowledge Series. Before I move on to welcome her, I would like to speak a little bit about her. From a child whose interest in books was prompted by her mother, as she said, there are no good books or bad books. There are only well written and badly written ones. To a celebrated author of historical fiction, narrative history today, Miss Nandini has come a long way, and it's a moment of delight to welcome you, ma'am. So I was going
Thank you so
through so I was going through her profile, and as we prepared for her presence today, I read she has written it on her website that my journey as a storyteller has just begun. The more I read, the more I find glittering gems buried deep in our history. It was on her website wall, clear and loud as to what she is, and that left me intrigued to continue knowing more about her. To be very honest, I went on to all the press releases and digital footprints she had. And there I found that after a chance visit to Ajanta and Ellora caves, she was fascinated with India's past in general and ancient India in particular. So, as we got to know from for next 10 years, she read history for fun. Stunning it must have been because her book credits include bestselling, The Blue Horse and the Other Amazing Animals from Indian History, which debuted in November 2020. It was shortlisted for Authors Award 2021 in children's fiction category. A unbelievable feat. Then there is The Ocean's Own, The King Within and the Poisoned Heart, Book 1, 2, and 3 of the Gupta Empire Trilogy by HarperCollins India, and the story of Kalidasa, the gem among poets by Eicher Good Earth Publications. Welcome to you, ma'am. I just have immense gratitude and excitement to be looking forward to a meet with you today.
Namaskar, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Priyanka. It's an honor to be part of this platform, and it is an honor to be able to speak at so august a platform about the books that have stayed with me for more than 10 years, about the three kings who have kept me company for more than 10 years, and a little bit about both their journey and mine.
That's amazing, ma'am. So, if you allow me, can I start with the question I asked?
Of course, I'm so looking forward.
So, as we're celebrating your final book in the enthralling Gupta Empire Trilogy, The Ocean's Own, I want to begin with this one. Is classical India as diverse and mighty interesting as, say, Mughal India? Because that's very mainstream. So, is it?
So I want to just start off by showing you the book. This is The Ocean Zone. This is the book that we are talking about. This is the third and final book in the trilogy. The other two books are The King Within and The Poisoned Heart. Very interesting question, Priyanka, because right now, there has been a resurgence in interest in Mughal India with the OTT series that is running right now on the Mughals. And I would like to tell you that ancient India is actually, not only is it as interesting, as colorful, as full of nuance, as full of details as Mughal India, it is also in many ways virgin territory. And if you notice, if you look at Bollywood, the way Bollywood has captured our history, you will see that there are many, many very beautiful films made about Mughal India. Starting off with, of course, Mughal Azam, and there are so many others, very successful films, very beautiful films made. But if you look at ancient India, ancient India has not been mined that much. And my dear friend and columnist Reshmi Das Gupta actually wrote about this in her column last week, where she says that ancient India is this content waiting to be tapped, because the life back then, and the history, and the sociological landscape, the people, the kings, the politics, the intrigue, all of it was unbelievably colorful, unbelievably dramatic. And I have only given a very thin slice of it in my Gupta trilogy. But if you read History for Fun, you will realize just how colorful and how unbelievably rich our ancient past was. And in fact, one of the things that I keep talking about is people tend to sort of dismiss, ancient India a little bit, saying that, oh, we don't have enough information. It is happened so many years ago. Things must have been very different then. The people back then, they must have been very different from what they are today. That is not actually true. It's not actually true. And over the course of the next couple of minutes, as we chat, I hope to bring out many, many aspects of ancient India which have remained unchanged for more than a millennia and a half. The clothes we wear, the food we eat, the footwear we wear, the beverages we drink, the toiletry that we use, the jewelry that we wear, all of it, not to mention the fact that many of our literary cues, many of our political cues, many of our social cues, all of them go back to the era that is described in my trilogy. So the civilizational links are really, really strong, and the era was rich. It was very, very powerful. It was liberal. It was creative. It was buzzing with can-do, buzzing with aspiration and ambition, and it's a wonderful, wonderful age to capture.
Liberal, creative, buzzing with a lot of things, and has deep roots in civilization. So well put. I mean, I can find myself there right now. And truly said, like there are so many movies made upon the other empires, and like you rightly said, even the OTT is now streaming towards it. But when I remember back, there are very few that has focused on these empires. So well said that the content is waiting to be tapped, and very well it has now begun, I must say. Okay. So this in totality leaves me very curious, and at the cost of sounding super fascinated, can I ask you about what kind of life did people lead back then? Like, what did they wear? What did they eat? What kind of jewelry did they wear? Were they fancy?
Wonderful. Yes, absolutely. So let's start with your day. All right. You're a millennial person. What do you do when you get up in the morning? You get up in the morning. You have a routine. You'll brush your teeth. You'll take a shower. Maybe you'll do a quick puja, and you will set off for your work. Right. Of course, things are different because of the pandemic, but generally, this is what you would do.
Right.
Let me tell you what the average citizen, the Nagarik and the Nagarika in third, fourth, and fifth century India would do. Third, fourth, fifth century of the Common Era would do. That's about 1500 years ago. So they would pretty much get up in the morning, they would have that same kind of routine, except that they would spend maybe a little bit more time than you would on their makeup and their toiletry, because they used to have a fairly elaborate routine of using some organic substances to dress themselves up, like sandalwood paste, turmeric paste, kumkum. All of these things, you have to understand, we still use. When we are when a bride gets married in India, we use the tattoo that we have, the beautiful, in Bangla we call it oloka tiloka. You have that beautiful design on your face that goes back millennia, that goes connects us to that same tradition that they had of wearing these very intricate tattoos, not only on their face but also on their body, with sindoor, with kumkum, with sandalwood, and with turmeric, all of them having medicinal properties as well. And then they would go off to work. There were these gongs that used to be sounded in the city, unlike today when we have say Alexa telling us the time. Back then there would be a prahar gong, in the city, telling people that it is time to go to work, and then midday gong telling them it is time to come back home for lunch, and so on. So when they came back home for lunch, what would they eat? I mean, as a millennial person, you would probably, either go for a very quick bite, a sandwich or something, maybe go to a restaurant and pick up a sandwich, or sit down for a quick meal. Guess what? Things were not that different 1500 years ago. There were these restaurants, these places that served food, and the earliest references to restaurants are there in the Arthashastra, which was written around 300 BCE. So the first references of restaurants go back then. And of course, Chanakya is talking about taxing these establishments, but basically, he couldn't tax them if they didn't exist. So these people would go and maybe catch a quick bite. What did they eat in these restaurants? Guess what? The food that they ate, many of those items are still consumed to this day. Like, for instance, the sweet dish, the dessert at the end of the meal, would be a kind of rice custard, which is still a very popular dish all over the country. We have some form or the other of the payasam or the kheer or the payesh, whatever you call it. It's basically a rice custard with milk that is still consumed to this day, right? And they would have rice, of course. They would have lentil and various types of vegetables with spices. Pepper was used in large quantities. Of course, unlike today, tomato was not there. There was no tomato, there was no potato, but pepper was used. A lot of indigenous vegetables were used, and they consumed non-veg food as well. Fried fish was a great delicacy. That was something that was consumed in large quantities, and those who were rich also got to consume things like game meat, pheasant, fowl, that people would go into the jungles and hunt and bring back. And so you had a meal of either pheasant meat or fish. There was vegetable, there was rice, there was payasam, and you end the meal with a pan. Now, when I was living in Delhi, I still remember we used to go to Pandara Road, and there was this shop which used to sell meetha pan. I still love it. Guess what? People used to eat it 1500 years ago. So pan would be consumed, and women would also consume pan because it would, give them a little reddish tint to their lips, which looked very pretty, and so on. And then they go back to work, and in the evening after work, some of them would go and visit a pub, something that, again, youngsters today do all the time, that after work you go and visit a pub, and a pub would be called a madhushala, because there were a lot of drinks that were made out of honey. Again, the references to these liquor shops or madhushalas goes back to 300 BCE. The Arthashastra gives us references to this. So it's a very old tradition. And I live in Pondicherry. In the Pondicherry Museum, for instance, there are these huge, if you go there, you will see it, huge terracotta amphorae, which are like huge pitchers, enormous. What did they bring? They brought Roman wine, Roman Sura wine to India. And apparently, Indians used to like their wine salty because the Romans used to bring the wine, use the sea route, and the wine would, through osmosis, soak up some of the salty air and become a little salty. And that's the kind of wine that Indians love to drink. And there were many other types of liquor as well. There were liquors like Madhvi, which was like a cocktail of madhu made out of honey. There was asava, which was like a kind of a rum. There was a kind of beer, which was made from sugarcane. There was gaudi, which was made from gur. So various kinds of liquor is available. And people sit down, they drink. What do they drink their wine with? They would have it with salt, and they would have it with various types of, finger food, like fried fish, for instance. And if they are in the mood, they would hop across and go and visit maybe a local place where there is, some kind of a play happening, or there is a dance performance happening, or a music performance happening, and they would go and attend that, and they would go back home. Now you tell me, how is this routine very much different from what you would do as a millennial? Not very much different, is it?
Actually, they feel like fellows from the same time, and they did all of that. They partied. They had probably better than us, to be very honest. Like,
Yeah.
wow, I mean, they had preferences, they followed it religiously, and were more meticulous than us. Intrigued, absolutely intrigued, and at the same time, a very, very important reality check about how little we know, and probably this is also the reason why we don't feel as belong to our history, because we don't know that we're coming from the same lineage. So
Yeah.
it gives me a huge intake and a view on why you have been fascinated with this, because there's so much to get absolutely immersed in. But what pops up in my mind as an another question is, what about them fascinated you so much? Because right now I want to know a lot about them, but what fascinated you so much to write a trilogy on them? Like, you wanted to write about it. What drove you to that point?
So, so when I went to Ajanta Ellora, these are the questions that popped up, in my head. I sort of looked at these people, and if you've seen the frescoes in Ajanta, and if you've seen those beautiful, beautiful sculptures in Ellora, you will see that the people there, the faces, they look like us, they look like you and me. And in Ajanta, actually, you can even see the skin tone, because the colors are still there. Ellora also was painted, but the colors have disappeared over time. But Ajanta, the colors are still there, so you can even see what their skin tones were, and they look like us. Their skin tones are like us. They look like us. And I sort of looked at them and I said, who are these people? Why is it that our history, when we read it in school, particularly in schools and undergrad level, it doesn't really tell us anything about life. It's very dry. It is told in a manner that does not really make us interested in our past, does not really make us want to know, that I want to know what happened back then. I want to know how did these people live, like for instance, just the other day, last week, in fact, somebody posted this amazing picture of a bodhisattva, figurine. This bodhisattva figurine was found in Gandhara. It dates back to the Gupta era, around 4th, 5th century CE. And the interesting part of that bodhisattva figurine are the chappals he is wearing. They look exactly like our Kolhapuri chappals. Exactly. No difference. So, you look at, and those chappals are very clearly shown. You can see them. He is wearing those chappals. And there are multiple examples. There are multiple figurines where you see the chappals very clearly. There are multiple figurines and on coins where you see the jewelry very clearly. And you see that, things have not changed. These people, they were not really, they were not Game of Thrones type characters. They were not Khal Drogo. They were people like you and me. Their lives were, in very many ways, were similar to ours. In many ways, it was better than ours. In some ways, it was worse because they did not have internet and the technology that we have today. But that there is nothing to assume. There is no reason to assume that their lives were not rich, that their pursuits were not interesting, and that their aspirations were not lofty. So that's what fascinated me, and that's the reason why I started writing about that era. And the more I wrote, the more I got sucked into it. In a sense that I was living in the 21st century. I am living in the 21st century, but essentially I'm living in the past. I think about the past not as some dead and gone era, but as something that connects us with our civilizational self.
At this point of time, I'm really thankful for the internet that it is making us go live, and I'll be able to see this conversation again, because the way you define it, what wouldn't I give, or I would feel that should be given to have a person who not only refers to Game of Thrones but also knows it so well when it comes to our history, that you have the power of making me think about it altogether. So, like you said, their pursuits were not something that you would not be invested in. You would be there with them. I'm stunned, to be very honest. So, okay, coming back. So, like, wow. But so, how do three Gupta kings, like you have told me that they have stayed with you for a really long time, and they're also the heroes of the Ocean Zone, the king within and the poisoned heart. It would be a very tough question, but at the same time, I want to put that in your court. Who is your favorite? And please elaborate on why.
Okay. So when I was writing, like you were asking me about,
Hmm.
when you describe these people, see, these characters are historical characters.
Correct.
So while this is historical fiction, I can't deviate from history itself too much. So what I did was, my primary research was to look at some of the coins that these characters, that these kings minted, and the coins have pictures of the kings. So they do leave behind their pictures in the sands of time. And I would say that, of course, all three of them, Samudragupta, Chandragupta, Vikramaditya, and Skandagupta, are fascinating characters, and I will tell you in just a bit. Um, because all three of them, if you look at their imprints on their coins, you will find that they are very traditionally good-looking men. All rippling muscles, six-pack abs. Very, very good-looking, very athletic, very strong, carrying weapons which would require an enormous amount of strength. So the Asi sword, for instance, the Garuda Dhwaja, which was their emblem, and other weaponry as well. And they would all have long hair, typical sort of curly hair, which is obvious in their pictures. Joined unibrow, very sharp profile. Some of them have very sharp, hawk-like, aquiline profiles, cleft chin, and some of them have high cheekbones. So very arresting faces, not very pretty, if you know what I mean. Not the chocolate boy pretty, but very, very arresting faces, and very, very well built, very handsome men. But apart from that, they are all three of them mighty, mighty warriors. And some historians have likened Samudragupta to Napoleon, but actually Samudragupta is a much, much bigger conqueror than Napoleon, because he remained undefeated in his life. He never lost a battle. Can you believe it? And if you look at the ocean zone actually has a map in the book. If I can show it to you.
Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. If you look at the map in the ocean zone, you will see just how big uh, the emperor's kingdom was. So they were very powerful kings. They were very mighty warriors, and yet king after king in this dynasty were liberal enough to pose with their queens on their coins. So you have kings who are powerful, who are conquerors, who are politically very powerful, who are also very generous patrons of art, literature, sculpture. Remember, this is the golden era of India. This is when Kalidas wrote his beautiful poetry. So these kings were patrons of art, literature, culture, architecture, and so on. But at the same time, they were modern enough, if I may use the word, to have their queens next to them while they were minting coins. And there are many, many examples of kings looking at appreciating a flower or playing the veena. Samudragupta, for instance, is shown playing the veena and so on. So in many ways, they are, I would call them millennial men. So, so I love all three of them, but if you ask me, my pick would be Samudragupta because he is one of the architects. He is the one who starts off this glorious dynasty. He establishes it. He is driven. He has ambition, and at the same time, he is a poet. He's a musician, and he mints coins with his wife's likeness on them. So what's not to love?
Absolutely. I mean, so much. And the fact that he remained victorious throughout in itself is something that you would not need an extra effort to glorify. That speaks volume about how powerful our history is. And truly said, like you, it's so tough to pick either one of them because all of them are so lovable and inspiring, to be very honest. They are, like you said,
Yeah,
they have very, I'm going to take home this word, they're arresting. They're not very they're not your usual synonyms or adjectives,
yeah.
they're just very arresting. So makes all the sense. So like this conversation also presents before me an opportunity to understand from you, now that we are exactly in that series of conversation, as to why is it important to read about classical India. Now, one thing I understand, because we're absolutely unaware, but apart from that also, what's your perspective why we should focus to read about these eras, who have lived by?
So classical India, Priyanka, in many ways, our civilizational uh, cues come from classical India.
True.
So, the Puranas, for instance, were codified and written during this time. Many of the Dharma Shastras were codified and written during this time. Uh, the pinnacle of excellence in literature, for instance, happened during this time, thanks to Kalidasa, of course. In art, in temple building, in architecture, in many ways, the heights that we reached happened during this time. So unless we understand where we were in classical India, we will not be able to appreciate how glorious our past was. And historian Abraham Irali calls it our first spring. Indeed, it was our first spring because that was when our civilization actually reached a certain height, a certain pinnacle. And you have to also understand that at that point, when I'm talking about art, literature, culture, liberal social structure, and all the rest of it, that is also backed by very, very solid economic power. Economically, India was very powerful. And that is the reason why these monarchs were also able, with political stability and military might, came economic power. And together, in many ways, the India of the classical era was a super developed nation. There is a very interesting comment made by a Roman historian, and he is talking about uh, Indian imports into Rome. You know, the women in Roman court, they used to covet Indian luxuries. Just like, you know, today women covet French luxuries. You know, I want a Louis Vuitton bag, or I want a Chanel dress. So back then, the Roman women, noble women, coveted Indian luxuries, like silk, like cotton, like gemstones, like pepper, for instance, like exotic pets, like peacocks, and so on. So these were all very coveted things. And this, so much of Roman gold used to flow into India to buy these luxuries, that this Roman historian is saying, please, please, girls, please stop coveting Indian, you know, luxuries, because it is beggaring Rome, you know. So can you imagine how rich India was, that the mighty Roman empire is saying, you know, people, the one of the greatest thinkers of that mighty Roman Empire is saying that, you know, we cannot afford this trend for Indian luxuries. So this is very important, and we have to understand this. We have to appreciate it. We have to look at it in wonder. Only then we will be able to reach those heights again. If we think that our ancient past was not important, was not interesting, was somewhat, you know, something that was not as exciting as, say, other parts of the world, or other historical periods of the world, then we would be doing our own heritage a grave injustice.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense, to be very honest. Like you said, it is important for us to know where we belong. And if we belong to such a mighty history, then there would be no doubt that we would be flourishing in a very different direction altogether, and a very different space and time. So I would like to take certain audience questions that are popping up, and they're very interesting, to be very honest. I was going through them, and it was such tough time to control my smile. Probably this is from a student, or probably a child who is an adult, but they've asked, did they have subjects like such history, chemistry, maths back then? Did they get to choose?
Yes, they did have several subjects, and in fact, mathematically, India was years ahead. I don't know if you know, but the zero was actually first discovered by Indian scholars, and went to the Arab world, and through the Arab world went to the Western world. But actually, the zero was our invention. So mathematically, we were very strong. There were astronomers, there were astrologers, people like Baraha Mihir, for instance. There were doctors like Charaka, uh, who were very famous. So there were various fields. Definitely, there were. The languages, of course, were very strong. But you must remember that the script that was used, if you think that they were using Devanagari, that is not true. They used to use Brahmi, but you know, Sanskrit was the court language, was the literary language. There were Prakrit was what was spoken by the others, but there were various dialects of Prakrit. You know, there would be Magadhi dialect or Sauraseni dialect. It's a little bit like a person who is speaking Hindi, who's from Bihar, and a person like me who is speaking Hindi as a Bengali. There would be a difference in our pronunciation and accents. So it's a little bit like that. But more or less, people would speak Prakrit, and of course, in the down south, Tamil was is a very ancient language, and quite well developed with its own literary body as well. So there were various different subjects that was taught and researched in great detail. Absolutely.
That was a great question. It was from Miss Vedika. All right. Moving on to another question by Advait. He's asking if you have to name three qualities that were very stressed upon during that empire. So, what were like three non-negotiable values they had? He has asked it in a very precise manner, but I sort of elaborated it. So, yeah.
So why three? I will give you only one. The non-negotiable value is dharma. You have to work, you have to act according to Dharma. And what is Dharma? Everybody's Dharma is not the same. If I am a weaver and you are the king, then your Dharma will be a Raj Dharma and my Dharma will be the Dharma of a weaver. So Dharma basically means that you have to act according to the demands and the the uh, aspects of your life, your station, your work. Don't deviate from it. If you deviate from it, if you go against it, that is adharma. You're going against your dharma. And this is something that permeated all aspects of their life. In fact, if you read the books, again and again, this question of dharma comes up. The kings keep asking. There is a point where Samudragupta defeats another king, all right, a vassal king. They had risen in rebellion against him and he defeats him. And his one of his ministers tells him, "Why don't you just kill him?" And he says, "I can't kill another king. That is adharma. I will defeat him. I will make sure that he does not create problems for me again. But I can't kill him. That is adharma. My Raj Dharma, I have to stick to." So, so this dharma, the concept of dharma, the concept of living your life according to the tenets of dharma is something that was very entrenched in the ancient world.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Probably they had very strong opinions about it, and they had very rigorous methods of making it follow. So makes sense. There is another question by Mr. Ravindra. He says, "Were there cooking methods? Like, what were they?"
So much of the cooking that they did was basically has remained unchanged. Like I said, the payasam, mixture of milk, rice, that sort of thing has remained unchanged. But certainly the spices that were used were a little bit different from what we use today. Like I said, tomatoes are something that came much, much later, very recently, in fact. Potatoes were not there. Many of the vegetables that we now take for granted were not there in ancient India. Vegetables like pumpkins, etc., were consumed, and because they are indigenous to India. Again, the fruits that we eat today, mango was consumed in great quantities. Mango chutneys were common. Pickles were common. Dahi was very, very popular, as it is today. So that has remained unchanged in many ways. As far as non-vegetarian goes, the fish, or typically fish, salted fish, being fried and eaten alongside rice and lentil soup is something that we still do in Bengal to this day. That was something that was done back then as well. Rice cakes or apupa cakes were eaten, something a little bit like the appalam that is eaten in some parts of India to this day. That was something that was eaten, and game meat was eaten. Typically, game meat would be barbecued on an open fire. Like you've gone on a hunt, you hunted maybe a pheasant or two. Peacock meat was also consumed. So you hunted these birds, and then you would skin them, and you would sort of barbecue them on an open fire. That was something that was also done, particularly by the warrior classes.
The question and the answer both have, exponentially increased my desire to be there in their face right now. What wouldn't I give to have a face like that? Wow. Thank you, Mr. Ravindra. That was a very interesting question, I must say. And your answers are phenomenally knowledgeable and at the same time, very interesting, to be very honest. I'll take two more questions. One is asked by Mr. Pushkar. He's asking, the Gupta era, for the most part, is often overlooked in history books. What is a reason for that, if it is true?
It's true. It is true. Um, See, the Gupta era is not, I won't say it is overlooked, but it is not given the importance that it deserves. So when you look at the school curriculum, Gupta era is sort of part of all the empires The child needs to mug up and learn, Mauryas, Guptas, blah, blah, Cholas, and you are done. And then you go on to the Sultanate, Mughals, and that's it. So it's a very sort of sketchy way of handling a period that is so critical, not only from the fact that much of our heritage comes from there, our dance, our literature, um, our food, our clothes, our jewelry, a lot of the cues come from there. Our dharmic cues come from there. Our civilizational cues come from there. So therefore, that era was not only a golden era, but also an era that is relevant to this day. I don't know why it is not dealt with in greater detail. Some people tell me that, oh, but we have learnt it in school. But that is a very perfunctory way of studying what was clearly one of India's golden ages. In fact, I think it was India's, like I said, Ibrahim Irani talks about it. He says it was India's first spring. El Basham calls it, the wonder that was India. And if you read historians like Radha Kumud Mukherjee, like R.C. Mazumdar, like Jadunath Sarkar, so many of them, they have given a wealth of information about this era. It should be read in greater detail. It should be understood and appreciated, because what we are today, many of those cues go back to classical India.
True. Rightly said. And that brings me to my question, which I would like to end this with, because I cannot resist asking you this. What would an India today look like if it was as aware, if it read books about it, if it would hear from people what it was like back then? What would an India which knows where it is coming from, is proud about belonging to an history, how would it be today? Like, I see a lot of people are unaware when there are discussions and debates, when you question them for a little while, they will be lost somewhere. But after this conversation, I'm getting that confidence. And imagine so many people like us who read books. For an example, let's take your very own book. If we read these trilogies, if we go through these literatures, revisiting it, how would it look like in the larger picture?
I would assume that that India would be more confident in its skin. Um, you have to understand that our colonial legacy has made us, in many ways, a little bit defensive about our own past. And the only way we can shrug off that colonial legacy is if we understand our past ourselves. We have to understand our own past. We have to take pride in it. We have to read it. We have to know it. We have to take pride in it. Because it's not something to feel defensive about at all. At a time when the Gupta emperors were forging this glittering legacy, half of Europe was swinging from the trees, literally. Because at that point the Western civilization was restricted to Rome. Beyond Rome, in many parts of Europe, the civilization was very, very rudimentary, literally, Game of Thrones, if I may use that expression again. It was nasty, brutish, and very, very unlike what we had in India. And I have, many people, I have had people coming up and telling me, why didn't you make your books grittier? You know, the reason I did not make the books grittier, because I did not feel that that era demands the books to be gritty. If you're following cues from the West, and they are saying that 5th and 6th century Europe or some part of England was gritty and violent and all that back then, that was their reality. But that was not our reality. So we have to understand what our reality was, appreciate it, feel proud of it, and only then we will be more confident in our skin. So I hope I am a history evangelist. All I want to do is, please don't take my books to be history books. They are just a window into the past. Read them, but go and read history for fun, and you will see what we were. How glorious we were.
For sure, you have changed the way I would look at Kolhapuris. You've changed the way I would, sit in a restaurant, and you've changed the way I would feel the next time I walk through the caves, because I know you've walked through. And this is what has left you after a lot of fascination. So I think when when there is a saying that there's nothing like this, is there the air of ideas is the only air worth breathing. When Elizabeth Wharton said this in Age of Innocence, probably she was speaking about conversations like this, like we had today. Trust me, you've changed me as an immediate feedback. And I'm sure my audience right now and everybody who's going to stumble on this video or is with us on the live stream, probably there are conversations that leave you very different as a person. You want to know about it. You're naturally fascinated. You want to search. Probably I'm going to Wikipedia it right away after we are done. I'm going to search through that how many other Guptas were there apart from Samudra Gupta, Chandragupta. So definitely there. And thank you so much for a moment like this. This was an experience speaking to you, Miss Nandini. And I wish to see you soon. I wish so much for your book, your career, your life, and I want to see so much for you.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. This was really interesting and fun talking to you. And all I want to say is that as writers of historical fiction and narrative history, our job is basically to make history a little bit interesting for the readers. And if reading these books, listening into some of these conversations encourages you to go and read for yourself, research for yourself, then I feel our job is well done. So with that hope, I will say namaskar. Thank you so much. Thank you, Priyanka, and thank you, Orange City Literature Festival. This was an absolute honor.
Thank you. And for my dear massive audience, I'm going to leave you in this moment of fascination with history, and I hope to see you next on 29th of September 2021, Wednesday at 6 p.m., where you will meet Dr. Natwar Sharma on the 56th episode of Knowledge Series of SGRKF. Just like Miss Nandini, he's also going to discuss his book, Metaphors of Memory. This book is about healing through past and current life regression. It's an interesting spin on past life regression through real life case studies. So if you today found Game of Thrones and at the same time Gupta Empire in the conversation, you're going to find snippets like that day also. It links memories of the past life and experiences and manifest themselves, which comes out to be physical ailments. So trust me, it's going to be interesting. Until then, I hope the universe treats you well. This is Priyanka Sharma signing off. Thank you.
Years of existence. 2 universities, 23 institutes, offering 137 courses. Raisoni Group of a vision beyond.